Welcome, everyone, to our NACDA podcast series. Today, we're featuring Dr. Ilan Meyer, and we're going to talk about his work with the Generation study. Dr. Ilan Meyer is a distinguished senior scholar of public policy at the Williams Institute, UCLA School of Law, and Professor Emeritus, Columbia Mailman School of Public Health, Sociomedical Sciences. His research is focused on study prejudice and stigma and how it affects health by increasing minority stress in sexual and gender minority populations. He's currently working on a study of aging LGBT populations in the United States, and most recently has completed 2 related studies of LGBT populations assessing a diverse set of issues, including identity, community, stress, and well-being. And we will provide links to those resources in the YouTube description. So thank you so much, Elon, for being here, and we'll get started with our interview questions.
Thank you for inviting me. Great to be here.
Great. So can you talk a bit about how you got involved with your research?
So I have a long career. So when it says this research, your research, you mean this research, but this research actually started as early as my career started. So I've been doing this for a long time, and my interest was in understanding LGBT populations, in particular mental health issues. I actually started my career in psychology, then moved to public health. So I was always interested in mental health. And slowly, I realized that there are so many methodological challenges to answer some of the main questions in epidemiology, which is, do LGBT people indeed have more stress related to prejudice and discrimination? And is this stress related to health outcomes? And that's basically what I've been doing my entire career, trying to address issues like that.
Thank you. That's great. So, what would you say are the central objectives of your recent work with TransPop and the Generation studies?
So both Generations and TransPop are related studies in that they both use an innovative methodology to recruit study participants in a nationally representative sample. The challenge with studying sexual and gender minorities is that they're a small proportion of the overall population. And so when you have any study that asks this question, as some studies now do, you end up with a small group of people that you're interested in. So the studies that the government conducts, for example, BRFSS, are excellent source of information, but they don't ask specific questions. They ask questions that address the entire population and not questions that's specifically relevant to LGBT people. And so my purpose in these 2 studies was, number one, certain substantive issues that I will talk about in a second. But number 2, which is just as important, is to create a national representative sample of these 2 populations, a sample that allows you then to study issues that are specific to these populations that we don't, as I said before, normally get in government studies. The substantive question was, again, the same one that I posed before. Well, how do LGBT people experience what kind of prejudice, discrimination related stress, and how it affects health? But in Generations, we also had a secondary aim, which is to address some of the national timeline that we've seen in LGBT issues, because over the past 60 years, there has been a lot of changes in public attitudes, in law and policy. And so the purpose of Generations was to not only see how stress related to prejudice is related to health, but also how it affects different cohorts, we call them generations, different cohorts of people differently. So people who came of age during Stonewall versus people who came of age when marriage equality was being fought. So their experiences we thought was so different that it'll be interesting to track this along those historical periods.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds really important. And I bet in your own research you came across a lot of limitations with just trying to identify those specific populations in other studies. And I can imagine that carried over into how you manage the data for these two collections. And for generations, actually for both of them, I'm looking at them and I see that they both have public and restricted use files, which that's so great. Thank you for making sure that there's those different levels of access, because if they were only restricted, I feel like that would be such a shame.
Yeah, and actually news coming out as this moment, we're just about to upload the combined data set, which would allow people to look at the two populations and compare among them, because the two studies, I should say, were separately recruited at the same time because we wanted to ask very different questions of the transgender people as opposed to the cisgender LGBT people. And but we also wanted to be able to then compare them because they're part of the same community as we refer to them in public health, public policy discussions. And for that reason, there's a lot of overlapping questions, which we are now releasing as well. The data set that includes both, as well as the weights in each sample that address some response bias and other issues in the studying LGBT populations.
That's great. Thank you for that. So, what about your major findings? When you were looking at these data, were you surprised by anything, or did it confirm any ideas that you already had?
So, well, first of all, again, just going back to from the beginning of my career, at the whole notion of stress and health and LGBT people was, I would say, radical because the stigmatization of LGBT people led to theories that basically blamed them. So it was either genetic theories or something wrong with their perceptions. And that's why they have more, let's say, depression. And what this, in general, what my work and many other people who work in this field has shown is, no, it's not an internal thing. It's the environment, the social environment to be precise, and it's the laws and policies that we can pass to affect the health of LGBT people. So moving forward to generations, as I said, the purpose was to assess how the social changes that we observed affected stress exposure and health of LGBT generations who are, let's say, younger as compared to the older. And what we found was both, I would say, expected and distressing, if not depressing, because what we found is that although there were many changes in the social environment, they led to some changes in behavior of LGBT people, such as younger people coming out much earlier. They seem to be more at ease with that at an earlier time, and therefore, let's say, start their life as a LGBT identified person earlier. But then when we looked at the exposure to prejudice and discrimination and stress, we found that that type of stress on LGBT population has not declined significantly enough to show that the younger generation of LGBT people are actually much better off in terms of their environment. And we looked at things like bullying in high school, exposure to conversion therapy, exposure to discrimination in their daily lives. And in all of this, the younger generations reported just as much, sometimes more, than the older generation reported for their respective periods in life. And so that was, as I said, not unexpected, but also uh, um, somewhat disillusioning because of the hope that those social changes would lead to better outcomes. And what we saw that some of those, I guess, moving on to some further conclusion, if you let me finish that, is basically some of the social big changes that we've seen in our policies and laws, take time to penetrate, to impact the lives of every person. And some of the stressors remain regardless of policies and laws. So, um, for example, rejection by some religious institutions is something that people still experience. And so that's what the results of the generation study.
Thank you so much for explaining that. Yes, that's that's interesting to hear. And with NACDA, we're focused mainly on longitudinal data and outcomes. And so thinking about these studies and the time frame and going forward, what else you might find in future years. Do you plan to collect more data for the generation study with the same kind of cohort or sample?
So we right now don't have any immediate plan, but it has been something I've been wanting to do. But right now I'm involved with people at the University of Chicago, Linda Wade, that I know also you had interviewed and is in your data set, of course. And we're working to kind of combine the two approaches. They're very um, well established and fantastic study, the NCHAP, with a kind of new generation study where we're going to recruit new sample of people over age 45 and look at some of the same issues that I described just now in terms of the minority stress exposure, the particular issues of geriatric populations, especially the older than 65, their ability to get support, for example, is limited because LGBT people tend to be less often married and have children, which are, natural sources of support. So we're going to look at all of those issues, as well as many other topics that are covered also in the NCHAP study, or the aging longitudinal study.
That's exciting. Thank you for telling us about that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we actually have started some part of the study and continuing to apply for more funds.
wonderful. So yeah, and it's always great to see the crossover in the research community, the gerontological research community, but not just gerontology, social science research community, like your work and NSHAP, and then what you said about LGBT older individuals, uh, less likely to be married and have kids, and so that really kind of relates to how much kinship and support they have in their older age. And we did an interview with Sarah Patterson, who uses NHATS and NSOC in her research, and she is very focused on that kind of research topic. So it's just wonderful to hear about all of the opportunities there are for different research topics with these studies. And how about now, would you talk about some of the challenges with the research process?
Well, I think every research has challenges, and the challenges are at every step of the process. I think with LGBT population studies, honestly, my first challenge that I've had in my career was to get the funding for that. I think that is becoming a little bit easier than it used to be. So that's one challenge. And then there's so many methodological issues. When I first started, so the design for this national probability sample started with the idea that I had a long time ago, actually, to make a phone call and in a quick interview on the phone, establish the person's sexual orientation and gender identity. And then if they identify, after they identify in this way, so you can call many people to find the few that you need that qualify for your study. And that was the design of Generations and TransPop, by the way. We called well over 500,000 people to get our sample. And that approach is obviously expensive and difficult, but to me, it's the only way to get a national probability sample that is a truly probability sample, not some of other approaches people have tried. That's not to say that, I do want to be clear that there's great value in a lot of studies, and a lot of studies that came in the LGBT history of studies of LGBT populations were not population studies. But right now, I think we do have the opportunity to do that. So that's a huge challenge. It's a challenge, especially to recruit some ethnic minorities. I'll tell you that in Generations, we had to exclude Asian LGBT people because the recruitment method, calling people, identifying them, would have taken us years to accomplish the number of people we needed in the different strata that we erected for the study, like age groups, etc. So there are a lot of costs to that too, and sometimes you need to do mixed approaches. So you need to kind of think about innovative ways to even recruit the study participants. Then you have issues around sensitivity of who identifies on the phone and who doesn't identify. I can tell you that during this transport study, which was just around when President Trump took office, and there was a sense of, honestly, fear among transgender people for the change in the government. And I received emails from people who were approached by TransPop, through our surveyor, Gallup, and they told me, identifying themselves to me in an email, but telling me that they won't do it because they're afraid to identify as transgender. So doesn't, basically this is the risk of how stigma and prejudice affects research participation. And then, of course, every other aspect of research that all researchers struggle with, or not struggle, but at least have to cope with, finding the right measures, the validity, the reliability of measures, etc.
Wow. Yeah. Those are great points. I mean, it's crazy to think about how much manual effort is still involved in the process, but then also all the multifacets of the challenges based on political and societal influences. And yeah, well, I'm glad that you were able to complete the collections and provide the data to us and share them with the research community. So what advice would you give to those trying to use the Generations data? And you might even include TransPop, because I know that you said there's a combined data set coming out,
Yeah.
but what advice would you give to those trying to work with those data, or in general longitudinal aging research data?
Well, that's a whole other session of instruction that I'm not even sure that I can cover myself alone on these complicated issues that you raised. But as far as Generations and TransPop, I mean, I don't think there's anything too tricky in it, and we've tried to provide working with ICPSR clear guidance as possible. I still sometimes get some questions, which I'm glad to answer. But most of it, I think, is pretty well covered in the materials that ICPSR has prepared for the study. So um, I think it's pretty straightforward for researchers who are familiar with working with such data sets.
Great, thank you. Yeah, often the answer we get to this is read the documentation. So I think,
Well,
yeah,
it's important because I always say honestly to students and people I work with in analysis, first look at the data, like just look at frequencies. That's why we used to do it. I see people, I used to print out every single frequency of every certain variable to look at it first, you know. So this is how you
yeah,
familiarize yourself with the data and with the what you're looking at, rather than just go to directly to do a regression analysis, you know. But other than that, I think
yeah.
I'm very excited. I have to say that since we published the data in the ICPSR website, it has been tens of thousands of people downloaded the study. So the data, so I'm very excited that it's been used. That was one of the purposes of collecting it.
Yes, that is very exciting. And you're right, they're very popular. And I think that that speaks to how well you've documented the data. And I love that you were like, just look at the frequencies. I think that that's great advice. What kind of conferences and meetings would you recommend to anyone interested in the same kind of research topic?
You know, I have always been, I guess you could say, opportunistic in terms of conferences I go to. I don't necessarily go to any one conference religiously, but I do go kind of depending on what I'm working on at any particular time. So it might be a topical a conference like suicide, maybe. It might be an international conference, depending on what kind of collaborations and I'm working on. And I in each of those things, uh, um, each of those types of conferences, you gain different things. You know, of course, there's some conferences like the APA, the APHA, so or APOR, where you meet a lot of colleagues and friends. So going to conference, I do think that going to conference in general is a really valuable thing to put a face, to talk to people, even to just know that you have seen them, and you can maybe email them if you need something. So as a student, I would go to um, conferences that matches your work. And this year, if you go to GSA, you will be able to meet me in person as well, because I'll be there. And we're going to present some data from the new collaboration with NCHAP.
That's great. Yes, we will be at GSA as well. So I look forward to meeting you in person. And GSA also has a special interest group for um, people researching aging and LGBT issues. So that's, it's a conference that we do attend every year since we're the Aging Archive at ICPSR. But thank you for the other recommendations.
Yeah, and I
And
think one of the special interest group on LGBT issues at GSA, one of the person, I don't know if she's still, I think she had some role, Crystal Kittle was my analyst working on Generations and TransPop. And also I was her dissertation committee review, which she did an amazing job. So we'll see her too.
that's great. It must be really rewarding to help someone else and see their work flourish. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
So now this question is more a bit about you. What excites you about being a researcher now?
Oh, wow. That is a good question. I think working, especially in LGBT issues right now, is, I guess, exciting is a good word, because so much is happening. And I've seen a time where we were trying to get LGBT issues into research agenda, and it hasn't been welcomed. And now I think there is room for this research to be aired. Um, but at the same time, we have so many challenges socially seem to be an increase in anti-LGBT hate, stigma, stereotypes being used all over, including by politicians. So there's times of a lot of social changes that makes research exciting to try to capture what we see and to try to identify the important topics that need to be addressed.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important to note that often the challenges and the excitement can go hand in hand in a sense, even if, you know, you wish it were different, that it could be exciting without those political or societal challenges and the stigma. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true, but you know, there's always going to be challenges. And yeah, you're right. I wish it would be normal challenges, not political assault on
Yeah.
LGBT lives. But yeah, but as far as researchers, I think it is a very important time to produce good data and to advocate for your data to speak for itself.
Right. Well, thank you so much for this important work that you're doing. And, you know, hopefully, well, actually, not even hopefully, I think even just based on the downloads, like you mentioned, this will have a large impact in the research community and inspire others to have good data and diversify their research topics. And I just want to note that the generation study is study number 37166 at ICPSR, and TransPop is study number 37938. And these are both distributed by our sister archive, DSDR, Data Sharing for Demographic Research. And thank you so much, Elon, for being here today and for talking with us. And I think that my director, Dr. James McNally, wants to say something.
So very quickly, if I can do it without breaking into a coughing fit. This is great. Congratulations. I'm curious if you've got a good, solid methodological paper on how you got your representative sample. I worked with Judy Bradford at Fenway Health
Oh, wow.
several years trying to develop a mechanism to identify without stigmatizing LGBT populations for survey research. And we just never hit on a good method because they had good health information. But you did it, and it's hard work, it's shoe leather, it's making the calls. But I was wondering if you could recommend one of your papers that describes how you went about this.
Yeah, we do have a paper that describes it, and I'm glad to post it maybe with this podcast, I guess, if it's possible.
Yeah, you can email it to me and then I can include it in the description.
Okay, and it's wonderful to hear Judy Bradford's name here. I miss her. She was a wonderful person.
Every day I miss her.
Yeah.
It was beautiful.
Yeah.
But congratulations, you carried that work so much further than she or I could have imagined back in the early 2000s. So this is really, really enlightening and very, very happy to hear this kind of work going on. So thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for including me. And I really appreciate ICPSR's work on everything, including my data sets.
Thank you so much to our guest and to our listeners for joining us on this podcast. You can find links to studies we referenced by viewing the description and content below. If you have questions or ideas, please email us at icpsr-nacda@umich.edu.